Welcome to Risky Bitness. We are taking a trip to Beat 'em Up City. I hope everyone's having a good time playing games and getting caught up during this pandemic that we're all dealing with. By the time this video uploads, I hope that things are starting to get back to normal. Streets of Rage 4 just came out, so I'm sure if you're playing that game, enjoying that, you're probably going to be a fan of today's topic. We're going to talk about Rushing Beat for the Super Famicom, also known as Rival Turf for the Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo never really had the power under the hood to bring the arcade experience home, but when it came to beat-em-ups, it really was the little console that could, boasting some of the best beat-em-up experiences in the 16-bit console generation, like Turtles in Time, Super Double Dragon, the Final Fight series. This was even more true in Japan, where titles like Iron Commando and Denjin Makai could be found. One popular SNES exclusive beat-em-up series that did make its way from Japan to the US did so in a kind of bizarre way. The subject of today's video is Rushing Beat, the first in a 3-game series from Jaleco that Western gamers probably didn't know was a series at all. For this video, I'll be talking about just the first game in the trilogy. The others will be covered in an upcoming video, so be sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss those. If you've ever heard of Rushing Beat, chances are you've only seen it by its Western title, Rival Turf. However, if you haven't heard of that title either, I don't blame you at all. Rival Turf was not well received in the West, mostly being viewed as a mediocre knockoff of Final Fight, whose only major selling point was a 2-player mode not included in the Capcom hit. It came out in 1992 and was developed and published by Jaleco, who were mostly known for making arcade games. Today we'll be looking at Rushing Beat and some of the differences between the Japanese and US releases. On its surface, Rushing Beat is your typical arcade-style action game where you heroically beat hundreds of small-time crooks to death as you walk around the mean streets of a fictional city. At the end of each stage is a much stronger boss enemy until you finally reach the big boss at the end. He is not appearing in this video because I couldn't make it to the end. Your enemies are pretty run-of-the-mill palette-swapped enemies, though there is a bit more color in this game. You've got a guy with a motorcycle helmet, Arnold Schwarzenegger, a judoka with a ball cap, that one always makes me laugh. The bosses include a genie, a luchador who doesn't lucha, and a dollar store Vega. The art design is definitely unusual, but I think it's pretty clever. It's nice that they got creative. Sticking with the motif of a cheap Final Fight knockoff, you'll fight on a city bus and scaffolding, but you'll also visit some vaguely South American-looking jungle and what appears to be a call center. However, Rushing Beat does add a few unique twists into the old formula that make it worth talking about 28 years later. Most notable is the Angry Mode, a cool little mechanic that allows the players to randomly fly into a rage after taking damage. For a few seconds you'll be invincible and you can do more damage to enemies, including super throws that fling them all the way across the screen. You can also perform running attacks that knock opponents down. The R and L buttons are dedicated to run, which is a really nice touch. Other than that, it's your typical 2-button setup with one exception. Instead of pressing Y plus B for a special move, use the A button, and that'll give you a spinning attack that knocks down any nearby enemies. You can break open crates to find weapons and food. What's cool about this game is that you can pick up the crates and slam them. I didn't see much of this at the time. It is a little bizarre though that you mostly get throwing weapons until stage 5 when you finally get to use a wrench and a baseball bat. Still, the way the characters use those weapons looks kinda weird anyway. There are 2 playable characters, Douglas Build and Rick Norton. Rick Norton is your generic hero and looks about as white meat babyface as you possibly can get. Build looks a little too much like a certain Street Fighter and probably contributed to the perception of this game as a knockoff. His repertoire includes a number of pro wrestling moves, whereas Norton is mostly your typical karate guy. Well, except for his German suplexes. I prefer Build for his power, although he is slower, but also because he has the unique ability to kick enemies in the nuts. The options allow you to adjust the difficulty and number of lives and continues, but the continues are still capped at 5, which I think is pretty absurd. After all, the purpose of this sort of game was to take your quarters in the arcade. Continues were only limited by how much money your dad gave you when he dropped you off at the Nathans. It should be possible to finish games like this via attrition. It's not as if the gameplay requires any particular skill level, you just keep on trying until you win. You can see that it's really not anything special graphically. The color is nice, but the backgrounds look very flat, the sprites are more blocky and pixelated than usual. It's not a bad looking game, but they are just much better looking titles on the Super Nintendo. The story is introduced via a cutscene in which Rick Norton finds out his sister is being held captive to prevent her from releasing a videotape that reveals the truth behind a drug epidemic that has crippled the city. He heads to the stadium where he believes she is being held. Rushing Beat definitely has a few standout features, and the soundtrack for sure is among them. It definitely slaps, and on a console that is just packed to the gills with great music, it can proudly live up to the expectations of Super Nintendo players. So overall, Rushing Beat's a solid game, even if it is a little bit derivative. So what happened with the US release? Well, if you remember this game at all, you probably remember the horrendous box art. I don't know what they were thinking when they designed this. It's two kids dressed as what I guess is supposed to be gangsters, posing in what I guess is supposed to be a threatening way. The log is basically plain text, and the backdrop is the laziest picture of a city I have ever seen. This is to say nothing of the title itself, which implies that the game would be a war over turf between rival gangs. I don't understand who came up with that or why. My best guess is that those responsible just never really played the game. The box art and the title aren't the only changes to the localization. The intro and some of the ending were removed from the US version, and the character names were all changed. Rick Norton and Douglas Build were changed to Jack Flack and Uzi Nelson, which are way worse names. I guess maybe they were going for Ozzy? I don't think the localization team were native English speakers at all. Also, Uzi is black now. I don't know why. I guess he looks less like M. Bison. Even enemy names were changed, and while they weren't the most creative to begin with, the US version's enemies are still really poorly named. The story was changed completely. Jack is in search of his missing girlfriend this time. Instead of being tipped off by a thug, he just kinda guesses at where she probably is. He called his friend Uzi, the police officer, who naturally assists his civilian friend in beating legions of randos to death. The instruction manual explains it in the most cringe-inducingly 90s way possible. Check out this Mountain Dew commercial madness. Downtown at the police station, a telephone rings. Hey Uzi, it's Jack! Listen buddy, I'm in big trouble. We gotta do something fast. Heather's been missing for 2 whole days and I think Big Al's got her. Yeah, kidnapped. No, she's not at the mall. Don't you think I'd check there first? I know you're on to Big Al. We gotta find this guy before something happens to Heather. Okay dude, I'm on my way. You're probably wondering what's going on, so I'll fill you in. Heather's my girlfriend, see? And she's been kidnapped by Big Al and the Street Kings. Yeah, I know it sounds kinda like a 50s rock band, but trust me, these guys are major bad news, dude. They beat up on old ladies, steal lunch money from kids. My little sister can't even ride the bus to school anymore. They're taking over the city, so Uzi and me are doing everything we can to stop them. That's my buddy Uzi Nelson. Uzi's a cop. His real name's Oswald, but all the guys call him Uzi for short. Oh yeah, by the way, my name is Jack. Jack Flack! Anyway, like I was saying, Uzi and me have been trying to run these scum out of town for good. Trouble is, we haven't been able to get to their boss, Big Al. Uzi's been hanging out on the streets and he's heard a rumor that Al's got a secret hideout south of the border. His thugs keep it under guard day and night, but that's not gonna stop us. Me and Uzi are gonna find that slimeball and rescue Heather if it's the last thing we do. Well, I gotta get down to the police station. Uzi's waiting for me. We're heading over to the sports stadium first. That's where a lot of the Street Kings hang out. Uzi thinks we might be able to, persuade a couple of them to help us find Big Al. You wanna go? Okay kid, come on. I got a feeling we're gonna need all the help we can get. And if you didn't tune right the hell out during that, thank you very much. I hope you found it funny, and I hope that it didn't cringe you completely out of your skin. That was really something. You also cannot adjust the difficulty or number of lives or continues here, most likely due to the American market always making games harder to discourage rentals. Gameplay remains identical with a few subtle differences. Uzi can no longer kick thugs in the nuts, and when an enemy is defeated, an X appears over the portrait instead of the Japanese character for death used in the original version. Western reviewers were unkind to Rival Turf, and I think it was largely forgotten. It probably didn't sell terribly well, but I was unable to locate sales figures online, so this is really just a guess. Nevertheless, the sequels did wind up being localized and not treated as part of the same series. I'm guessing they didn't want anyone associating newer games with this one after the poor reception. It must have done well in Japan though, because it did start a trilogy. I remember this game because I rented it a few times, and I remember seeing it at the video store and I kind of laughed at the stupid box art, but later on I kept on finding myself really interested and intrigued by it. It turned out to be a good rental and I enjoyed playing it. I think it's definitely worth spending a rainy afternoon on this one, especially with a friend. These games are always more fun with a second player, and they're always built so that you can get to the end if you do have a second player, but probably can't otherwise. Make sure you turn on notifications so you don't miss my upcoming videos on Rushing Beat Ron and Rushing Beat Sura, not to mention lots of other classic titles. I cover legendary franchises like Castlevania and Final Fantasy, as well as forgotten or obscure games and series, including games that never left Japan, so be sure to subscribe if you're a fan of classic video games. Thanks again for watching. If you have anything to add, let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Until next time, game over.